But from my experience, ironically, Cataclysm feels more like you're experiencing expanded vanilla WoW content with improved class design and raid mechanics. Ever since Classic WoW launched, everyone has wondered, when will Classic WoW end? When will Classic WoW no longer feel like Classic as we go through all of the expansions? And many claim that this definitive point is Cataclysm. This will be the point in which many players will simply stop playing Classic, which probably means in a year or so my YouTube career will be over and I have to explain to employers why my 4-year employment gap is because I made videos about video games on the internet. Unless I start selling my post-shave sink water on OnlyFans. Well, personally, I don't remember Cataclysm really being that bad as people make out. So I decided to find out for myself. For the past 6 weeks, I have poured over 100 hours into playing the Cataclysm expansion. How is this possible, you may ask? I used a time machine. I made one in my backyard out of a tin of beans and drywall nails. Anyway, these are the topics that I want to cover. First of all, we'll talk about my first impressions of playing the expansion, the major changes and added features in Cataclysm. We'll talk about endgame, you know, raids and PvP, the leveling experience, and then I'll finish off with some final thoughts. So one of the principal sentiments in the community is that Cataclysm is too much like retail. Now that I've both played retail and Cataclysm extensively, I can confidently confirm they are worlds apart. Honestly, Cataclysm just feels like a natural continuation of Wrath of the Lich King Classic raiding. Gameplay and endgame wise, they really aren't that drastically different. In a weird way, Cataclysm feels more like playing a Classic Plus server. The expansion is set in the original Azeroth. The new zones and raids feel like restored cut content from the original vanilla. In some cases, they literally are. But the gameplay is more like Wrath of the Lich King Classic, with more viable specs, more fun abilities, and less class restriction, or what I like to call fun policing. An iconic example of this will be how Warlock Soul Shards are no longer an inventory item, utterly consuming inventory space. Instead, you get free to use on certain abilities in combat, and this resets on a new fight. So we have Wrath of the Lich King Classic gameplay mixed with Classic Plus style content. What could possibly go wrong? Well, there are a few changes and additional features that many players might not like, so let's talk about it. I decided to mess around with many max level characters of every single class to get a feel of the class changes, but mostly I played a Protection Warrior for this journey, which has been pure suffering, but kinda in a fun way, like watching Game of Thrones. Doing heroic dungeons as a Protection Warrior is as risky as going out for one beer with your friends, because apparently the Protection Warrior isn't very strong in Phase 1 of Cataclysm with 4.3 talents anyway. And I discovered this the hard way, but despite of all this, it is the most fun version of the warrior I have ever played. For some reason, a prot warrior does utterly mental damage, and you can spread rend to every single target nearby with a cheeky thunderclap. Defensively, the prot warrior works very different in Cataclysm like every other tank because of the addition of a mastery stat. Mastery will provide a class-specific and unique effect to your character. For instance, the prot warrior can now critically critically block to prevent 60% of total damage rather than the usual 30%. And a frost mage, for example, when they cast frostbolt to build up these things called icicles to a max of 5, and then they can then later launch at the target all of these icicles with a simple 1 ice lance. Usually the mastery stat does provide an extra creative layer to every spec, but sometimes the stat honestly is a little basic. Hunters no longer have mana and instead have focus like pets do, so you no longer have to care about mana, which makes sense because, let's be honest, you're not a wizard, you're a hunter. Paladins now have a holy power resource system, a little similar to combo points. You know, certain abilities are generated and then others will consume it. Both DPS and healing abilities consuming holy power, but they are totally mana free. Warlocks have more unique AoE and no longer just spam Seed of Corruption. Demonology gets Hand of Gul'dan, and Rain of Fire finally actually becomes viable for destruction spec. And they also get the ability Bane of Havoc that mirrors 50% of their total damage to another target. Mage get Time Warp, which is exactly like Bloodlust, so you no longer have to always bring a Shaman to your raid. Shadow Priest and Affliction Warlocks, or any Warlock spec, their dots now fully benefit from Haste and Crit by default. It's no longer a talent. And you'll also notice that much less of your damage as a melee will come from your basic melee attacks and more from your actual abilities, meaning many melee classes are now much more bursty. There's also a number of new class and race combinations added to the game to add more variety and suppress the massive homogenization, like how only Alliance Draenei's could be Shamans or Blood Elf Paladins. By the way guys, this project has taken me a lot of time to finally complete. I've had to sacrifice my usual upload schedule quite a lot to get this project finally done, so I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. The more people who subscribe when I make these bigger projects means I can make more of them, which is better for both of us really, because I put a lot more passion into these videos. Also, all subscribers can get access to my best add-ons and weak auras spreadsheet guide for every single class in the game for Wrath Classic and Classic Era. Just check out the description of my channel trailer. The talent tree and glyph system have also been totally revamped. There are things I like about it and things I don't. Firstly, there is a spec system where at level 10 you get to select a spec, and this means you unlock the spec-specific abilities and mastery stat earlier in your leveling journey. This means, yes, at level 10 you can get a Felguard for instance, or a Survival Hunter can get Explosive Shot, or an Elemental Shaman can get Thunderstorm, all at level 10. The only problem is when you select your spec, you can't off-spec into other talents until you get to the bottom of a tree, meaning there's less customizability. There's also much less talent options than there was in Wrath of the Lich King. This means you won't be able to hybrid specs or make prominent sub-specs, like for instance how Blood Death Knight right now in Wrath of the Lich King is near enough a Blood Frost hybrid spec. I mean, you can either love or hate this, but I think most viable specs right now in Wrath have to get to the bottom of the tree anyway, and Cataclysm aim to prune talents by getting rid of all the boring ones or combining them into other talents. Or all talents are now a default passive ability in a spellbook, or they are now a glyph. So although at first glance it looks like the classes are being pruned, but in reality it doesn't really feel that way when you actually play the game. You actually feel like your toolkit is better and bigger in Cataclysm because most classes get 2 to 3 totally new abilities and added systems. Like for instance the Unholy Death Knight getting the Dark Transformation system that buffs its pet on death coils, and then when that stacks to 5 it will transform the pet into a big ugly abomination, unlocking loads of new abilities. And then there's other new abilities that classes can have, like Flame Orb, Trap Launcher, Heroic Leap, Leap of Faith and Smoke Bomb, just to name a few. And because the talent trees are the same size as they were in Vanilla WoW, ironically it adds to the feeling that you're playing vanilla. I really think Blizzard's design philosophy with Cataclysm was to convey a splash of vanilla nostalgia into the expansion. The glyph system is definitely a country mile better, there's absolutely no argument about it. Now glyphs are permanently taught to your character when you click them, so in the glyph menu you can just swap them around to your heart's content. You also get to have much more glyph options, adding for more customizability since you have 3 prime glyphs, 3 major glyphs and 3 minor glyphs. So again, although the talent trees are smaller in Cataclysm, technically they're not, because you can have extra glyphs, and many of the Wrath of the Lich King classic talents are just passive abilities anyway. Another big criticism of Cataclysm is the old world was ruined and the original vanilla world was so much better. How much of this is true and how much of it is rose-tinted goggles? Let's take a look at this through the lens of a more casual player who enjoys solo leveling, a player who actually cares about content other than just the endgame. What does this player care about in an MMO? Well, what they want, normally, is a good leveling journey with fun quests, exploration, and a decent story that's communicated well to the player. Vanilla WoW quests can sometimes be dull and repetitive and have a lack of creativity. There's also just not much out of go kill a certain amount of enemies or collect this item off the floor. There's also quite a few quests that involve picking up poo off the floor, which seriously makes me worry about what was going through the mind of a lead quest designer back in the day. I'll give credit where credit is due. Sometimes vanilla quests are interesting, like for instance the Ashenvale escort battle that Horde can do called Terex Assault. There's also absolutely no voice acting apart from very rare instances, so without this new AI add-on, you really have no idea what's going on in the story when you're leveling up in vanilla, because the problem with playing an MMO is you always normally just want to level pretty efficiently, and sitting and reading quest text rather than just going on to the next quest pretty quickly is something realistically only 1% of players are going to do. In Cataclysm, the quests are much more creative. There's more opportunities to use vehicles, huge cinematics with Deathwing and other key characters from the lore and story of the game, loads more voice-acted RP moments to communicate the story well, and even some instances where you get teleported to different areas that can almost be described as mini instances, very similar to Lord of the Rings Online. And this is not to mention how well designed the Worgen and Goblin starter zones are. The point is that when leveling Cataclysm, there will be objectives other than just killing mobs and picking up loot. And you don't lose this sense of exploration and progression either from Vanilla WoW because there's so much of a big world to explore. Another one of my favourite zones is Stone Talon Mountains, where you're actively taking part and contributing to a war effort, where you feel the zone change and progress to you completing quests. You even actually rank up when you're in this zone.
I sent you into Stone Talon Mountains with an army. Your orders were to secure this land for the Horde. Instead, you laid waste to the land, murdered innocents, children even.
And because of a Cataclysm, these boring, bland desert zones like Tanaris and Desolus become more interesting and diverse. Even Badlands become more interesting, with a questline that makes you feel like you're in an Indiana Jones film. I understand that it's quite sad that the old world basically gets eradicated from the game, but it wouldn't surprise me if Blizzard introduced a better system where you have the option to level up on a classic era realm and then later transfer to live Cataclysm realms if you want to continue leveling. Another great system added in Cataclysm was reforging. This gave you the ability to take off a little of a certain stat on a certain piece of gear and reassign it to a different stat better for your character. It's a very useful system to optimize your gear to make your character more powerful while you wait to get your full best in slot loot. The only irritation is sometimes tanks will need on DPS gear and vice versa on mastery pieces because it can sometimes be an improvement. I feel like this is a minor issue compared to the added fun and complexity the system offers. Because it's always fun nerding out and optimizing your character with systems in the game. It's the literal point of an RPG, and I have no idea why they had to remove reforging, other than the need to simplify the game. I mean, if I wanted to play a simple game, I'd go and play Feral Druid. Dumb ways to die. Alongside reforging, they added transmog, the ability to change the appearance of a piece of gear to a different one. Now, the only people who dislike transmog are people who think it's fashionable to dress in your dad's clothes. Oh wait, that's like literally everyone these days, because wearing clothes that fit you is so overrated. I've actually had people come into my Twitch chat before and say that transmog ruined the game, and I'm honestly very confused as to how to respond or understand this sentiment. The only logical explanation is people who say this about transmog quite literally never leave the house. I don't get these people playing Reforging Classic right now who are happy running around with a mismatched multicoloured disaster equipped on their character. Transmog also adds content to the game. It resurrects the old content because back when you couldn't solo old raids, people would make groups for transmog runs, which means there's actually stuff to do in the game when you're not raiding. And because of this, Cataclysm becomes much less of a raid logging expansion than Wrath of the Lich King, because once you've done everything to progress your character in the week when it comes to, raiding with your guild, you can then progress your flair and style. And with the guild revamp, even more non-raid content is added to the game because of the new incentives. Guilds now have a level, which goes 1 to 25. It takes quite a long time to level up. Along the way, you can get perks like more XP, more justice point gain, reduced vendor costs, and eventually mass resurrection for your guild. There's also rewards to be unlocked like heirlooms, an extra teleport cloak to your major city, standards that grant bonus XP, honor and rep, and mounts and pets and tabards. And you progress the guild by doing activities together, so there's an incentive here to play the game and do stuff other than just raiding with your guild. The only problem with this is the system, ironically I think, made guilds less social and introduced a market for selling and buying guilds because people would just join guilds for the perks, and intentionally made guilds just to reap the gold bonuses when the weekly goals were achieved. I think Blizzard would have to make changes to the guild revamp if they did classic Cataclysm, like requiring guild members to be in a guild for a longer period of time to actually unlock the perks, or remove those gold rewards exclusive to the guild leader. And the last added major feature was the dungeon journal, which gave you the ability to read up on boss mechanics before you did the content and look at what dropped. It would show you how much damage precisely you were going to take from certain abilities, so it's very useful in that regard. Oh, and if you fail on mechanics now, you will look even more stupid because the game will now literally tell you the crack before you even pull the boss. But now it's time to talk about the endgame, to which I've experienced very extensively: heroic dungeons, raids, and PvP. Now, you can't just jump into heroic dungeons straight away because the dungeon finder has an item level requirement, but the needed item level is easily achieved by questing, normal dungeons, and honestly cheesing it a bit with PvP gear. However, this is only something that DPS and healers can really get away with because tanks are going to have a very hard time during their first few heroic dungeons. And prot warriors especially. I'm now fully heroic geared in my prot warrior and I still feel squishy. I've still not been able to complete the more difficult heroics. At first I thought this was just because prot warriors really were quite weak at this stage of the game, but after talking to a few people, yes, a prot warrior is probably the weakest of tanks at this point, but everyone doing heroics are having a rough time because they are so incredibly difficult. There's no wonder that the players from back in the day complained so much about the heroic dungeon difficulty that they had to nerf them, because they really feel like they're in the realm of Mythic Plus when it comes to their challenge. Actually bothering with your professions to craft some gear is a godsend as a tank, because you really do need some decent avoidant pieces before you jump into this content. The plus side of this is if you play a tank, you're going to get loads of love from your guild because you literally need so much gear in order to get through the stages of content. Now, the dungeons themselves, some are great and some are terribly boring, like Throne of the Tides. This has these like irritating giant squid people who repeatedly knock you into the ceiling. I mean, honestly, after dealing with these mobs, the prospect of online dating in 2023 almost seems appealing. But there's gem dungeons like Grim Batal, with an end boss quite literally more difficult than the raid bosses within Bastion of Twilight. This was such an interactive fight that required all players to react to mechanics, mainly a mechanic where the entire boss room is shrouded in this big purple mist, and if you don't stand at the eye of the storm, you will be dead in a couple of ticks. And on top of this, there was some ad management also. It really did feel like a mini raid boss. Now, the Deadmines end boss is a timed event where you have to fight your way through the dungeon, and if you don't kill the mobs fast enough, you will be engulfed by fire. Another guilty pleasure of mine is the Halls of Organization. This is a huge 7-boss dungeon that again feels more like you're inside a mini raid because it will take so long to clear all of the bosses. It's very similar to Legion's revamped Karazhan in that regard. This is something I like because I think 5-man content should be as relevant and as fun as the raid content. Once I got the best gear possible from heroic dungeons, I tried my luck at the raids that Phase 1 of Cataclysm has to offer. You have the 4-boss raid Bastion of Twilight, the 2-boss mini raid The Throne of the Four Winds, and the 6-boss raid Blackwing Descent. When you think about it, it's not a bad amount of raid content for an expansion launch, especially compared to the Wrath launch, because let's be honest, you just had a recycled raid and then 2 1-boss mini raids. No wonder everyone quit Wrath after playing it for 3 weeks really. Wrath Lich King Classic Naxx was the equivalent of copying your mate's homework at school but then changing it slightly so it doesn't look copied. Oh, and I forgot to mention the Cataclysm version of Vault of Archivon, the Baradin Hold, that had a boss release for every single raid tier, similar to, you know. I've already said that, so I don't even know why I'm just repeating myself. Let's move on. Just as a side note, the first half of Cataclysm had an insane amount of content. A revamped world, so that's over 40 new zones and multiple quest lines. Phase 1 and 2 raids were huge with normal and heroic difficulty, plus they revamped ZA and ZG into extremely difficult heroic dungeons that were size of mini raids, not to mention the 2 new battlegrounds and a rated battleground mode with some new arena maps. And they also added archaeology and all the added features that I mentioned earlier. Cataclysm really started to fall off when Dragon Soul was released because during this phase there was an insane level of content drought. This phase was out for nearly a full year, similar to the last phase of Fade? What the hell's a fade? Phase of Warlords of Draenor. And I honestly think that this bad second half of Cataclysm is one of the main reasons people dislike the expansion. The content drought has distorted the opinion of Cataclysm in the community because they have bad memories of getting bored because there wasn't anything left to do in the game. Fair enough, many players probably just dislike Cataclysm for Cataclysm itself, but classic Cataclysm won't have this content drought issue. So this is why I feel like Cataclysm gets a bad reputation that it doesn't fully deserve, especially as the starter Cataclysm was just so ridiculously strong. I mean, I've not even mentioned just how good Firelands was as a raid. My experience of playing Cataclysm has been nothing but fun so far, and I loved playing the expansion back in the day. But anyway, let's get back to the actual topic. I was supposed to be talking about raiding. Holy shit, the raids are good. Although I was struggling to stay alive on my prot warrior, Cata raiding really does feel like it will light the candle for every kind of World of Warcraft raider. For the more casual raiding guild, they can play normal mode and just enjoy it. And for the more experienced hardcore raider, they can have a spin on heroic difficulty. These two difficulty modes strike a great balance in satisfying the two different kinds of raider in classic WoW. And eventually the normal mode will get too easy for casual raiders, but that's no problem, because they can just progress on to heroic. And trying heroic in nothing but blue dungeon gear is definitely going to be a very good challenge for those hardcore raiders, so they're definitely going to be satisfied. Mechanic wise, everything is very creative and challenging. I think my favourite fight so far has been Cho'Gao because it was a real challenge for me as a tank to survive tanking him for as long as I could with his stacking debuff. It was also really cool when you defeat him on heroic and the entire floor just disintegrates beneath you, and oh wait, there's another boss. Deathwing's girlfriend that he got to take out, which is another great fight. And I still haven't even mentioned the last boss, obviously Nefarian of Blackwing Descent, where you have to take on both Onyxia and Nefarian in the same fight, and the whole room fills with lava and you've got to survive by jumping on these platforms. Raid sizes are also done differently in Cataclysm. You see, 10 man drops the same loot as 25 man, which means you can easily have a small close-knit progression raiding guild of 10 players. Theoretically, guilds should have less roster problems. You will no longer be forced to build a 25-man core team. You can have one 10-man team, or two 10-man teams, or a 25-man team, but you know, if you can't get enough people to join the raid on a particular night, then there's no problem because you can just split into two 10-man teams. It's very flexible in that regard. I also love how emblems have been reworked. It's just so much simpler. You have Justice points and Valor points, and that's it. Justice points drop from heroic dungeons and can be used to purchase heroic level gear, and then there's Valor points that drop from raids that can be used to buy raid level gear. And when the new raid tier comes out, the previous raid tier Valor gear can be purchased for Justice to help returning players and alts to get caught up on gear. The acquisition of PvP gear has also been simplified with a similar method. You have honor points to buy honor gear and conquest points to buy conquest gear. Honor is gained from normal BGs, conquest from arena and rated battlegrounds. There's a cap on how many conquest and valor points can be achieved every week, but the cap on conquest points can be increased by gaining more rated BG or arena rating. And if you get to 2200 rating, there's a new set of PvP weapons and gear that you can get, but they have the same stats, so technically they are purely for cosmetic reasons. This leads me onto the new PvP content available in Cataclysm Rated Battlegrounds. Now, I've not had a chance to experience it yet in Cataclysm, but I was a massive chain RPG addict back in the day, so I know enough to talk about it. This is probably the most fun you're ever going to have playing PvP in an MMO. Arena is cool, but at the end of the day, a Rated Battleground feels more at home in an MMO. Having to coordinate in a huge PvP battle with objectives is just built different compared to Arena. Remember how much fun Battlegrounds were in vanilla? Well, now it actually matters, and you don't just get rewarded for not showering, but rewarded for player skill. You still have to be a bit of a degen to get Grand Marshal, but if I was betting money on a fight between vanilla Grand Marshal players and RPG Grand Marshal players, my money would be on the RPG team. Torborad is the Cata version of Wintergrass.
Yeah. Oh, dude! Torborad! 10 minutes! Dude, we gotta get home. Dude, Torborad.
It's a new island where you can complete daily quests, much like the Isle of Quel'Danas. But another section of a map functions as a battleground similar to Eye of the Storm, where the winner has to capture 3 of the tower bases at the same time. The attacking team has 15 minutes to achieve this, however they can extend the timer by destroying the Tol Barad towers on a main fortress with the abandoned siege vehicle. For every tower destroyed, the timer is extended by 5 minutes. Tol Barad is normally fun until too many players are in one place at a time, and then the battleground turns into a postmodern impressionist freeze-frame style of amateur theatre that you watch in a small town literary festival. For the 98.6% of people who didn't understand that joke, it's a laggy mess. I mean, it could be a server issue, I don't really know, but when Grasp on Live Reflection Classic right now is also terrible, so Blizzard really need to sort their technology out before Cataclysm, but right now, I probably wouldn't trust the Reflection Classic dev team to change a light bulb. And it's a shame because other MMOs out there have done big scale PvP battles and absolutely nailed it, and it's really fun, but World of Warcraft just hasn't. Now, with a drastic character power level increase in Cataclysm, I mean players went from having around 40k HP at the end of Wrath to 120k HP. This means it's much easier to either solo or make small groups to do the old expansion content. Cataclysm is when the game has collection content. You'll be able to collect mounts, pets and transmog. It's now possible to do this, and with transmog in the game, there's a bigger incentive. People will make groups for Wrath raids, mostly ICC, just for transmog and mounts, and to be honest, it's normally a pretty decent way to make gold too. This means that there's a reason to actually log into the game other than your raid night. Like I said before, Cataclysm is much less of a raid logging expansion than Wrath Classic, because there's something to do and get from the old raids. People will be farming their perfect transmog for months. This makes guilds more social and servers more active, because think about it, in Wrath right now, what's the point of logging in other than raid night and playing your ults? In Cata, there's more stuff to do just on one character, because the game isn't just about power progression, it's about style progression. Professions were massively balanced in Cataclysm to where the bonuses of professions near enough, in most cases, have the same stat bonus. So, we're not going to have a situation where everyone is just going to go engineering. Like for instance how alchemy is providing an extra 80 strength on flasks, and blacksmithing giving you 2 extra sockets where you can put 2 gems with plus 40 strength. Engineering gets a cogwheel gem, that unique gems that can only be put on engineering goggles, which provide a huge secondary stat bonus, for example over 208 hit rating. You can also get new unique belt tinkers with different combat bonuses like a plasma shield to absorb damage or a boost to your primary stat for 10 seconds. Also adding Cataclysm obviously was the archaeology profession. This is a new secondary profession, so everyone can have it on top of all of their other professions. To sum this profession up, it's downtime casual content where you get to pretend to be Indiana Jones. You have to discover artifacts and piece them together, you will learn a lot about the lore and history of the game, and you have a chance to find cosmetic items and sometimes even gear equal in power to raid loot. Again, just adding to stuff to do when you're not raiding. There's also reps in the game that basically function the same in Wrath. Stick a tabard on, farm heroics and get some decent epic pre-raid loot, and then sometimes some cool cosmetics. Oh, and you will have to get exalted with some factions to get the enchant. Now when it comes to leveling in Cataclysm, there's definitely some improvements, but some elements I really don't like. When you jump in at level 1, the game is definitely better at helping new players understand the mechanics and playstyle of their class, because there's a mini quest where you have to practice your class on a training dummy. For instance, as a mage, you will learn about how your casted abilities will trigger your arcane missiles proc. But one of the biggest problems with the leveling is that the difficulty is non-existent. You're basically one-shotting mobs, never running out of mana, and are easily able to run around AoEing 10 mobs at a time. It's especially ridiculous when you have full heirlooms. So the solo leveling experience is kind of ruined and boring because there is no threat in the open world, unless you're pulling over 10 mobs. So leveling solo is pretty boring. To make leveling interesting again, you really have to, do some leveling with your friends by doing dramatically huge big pulls when playing the Dungeon Finder. Or alternatively, make a pre-made group with your friends and do some low-level BGs, because low-level PvP, honestly, is probably the most fun I've had in WoW for a very, very long time because of how the PvP plays out. Basically, most classes have the potential to one-shot each other. Definitely two-shot, because player power is ridiculous low level, but this is weirdly fun. and you also get loads of XP doing battlegrounds. Also, all of the battleground PvP vendors have been moved to the major cities, so you can just keep a character upgraded by getting better PvP gear along the way. So you can just exclusively just level doing PvP, and yeah, it's probably the most fun way to level in Cataclysm, to be honest. I suppose when you think about it, you only spend about 10% of your total time playing WoW leveling characters, but I still think the leveling experience should be fun in the game to encourage new players to keep playing. Most people I've talked to who play Wrath right now just want the leveling to be over and done with, because for them, World of Warcraft is all about the endgame. You know, Cataclysm definitely will light the candle of those players, because I honestly think the endgame is stronger in Cataclysm. But the die-hard Classic Andes who have gone back to play Classic Era are probably not going to enjoy Cataclysm leveling unless they make some serious changes to low-level content and make it more challenging. Because the leveling difficulty in Cataclysm is just a joke. I mean, mobs need to be 3 times as powerful to catch up to the power of players. Which I think is a huge shame, because I think the revamped vanilla world has so much gold and strength for players to enjoy, more creative quests, better storytelling, and more diverse zones, but the brain-dead difficulty of leveling makes the content boring. Honestly, it's about as brain-dead as watching a Marvel film after you've seen like 1 or 2 of them.
How dare you! How dare you!
There's no wonder this became the era of people just spamming the dungeon finder, but let's just seriously think about making major gameplay changes to the low leveling experience, otherwise all the work they did to polish and revamp the old vanilla world was just a waste of time. It's ironically made players dislike content that they would normally love to experience, especially the die-hard vanilla fans who love storytelling, questing and exploration. So after 100 hours of playing Cataclysm, do I think the expansion is as bad as everyone says? Definitely not. I understand the sentiment behind it. The original Cataclysm has serious content drought issues. The expansion could have easily fit in another raid tier before Mists was released. And with the old world being replaced and the difficulty being made redundant, I can also understand why a lot of a casual audience are not too keen on the expansion and feel like a lot of the classic feeling has been lost. But from my experience, ironically, Cataclysm feels more like you're experiencing expanded vanilla WoW content with improved class design and raid mechanics. For the people who love raiding in Wrath of the Lich King right now, and for people who want to experience a Classic Plus experience, Cataclysm will definitely satisfy that itch. Cataclysm in the grand scheme of things is not going to feel that much different day to day than Wrath Classic. Good raids and fun classes to play, what more could you want? It Bob's your uncle. On top of that, with transmog in the game, there's more reasons to play old content for cosmetics. So I don't really understand why so many people playing Wrath Classic right now are saying that they won't play Cataclysm, when the same reasons that people enjoy Wrath of the Lich King Classic are also there in Cataclysm. I mean, what are these people going to do? Just delete your character? Or go and play the many other great MMOs out there?
No, he's got a point.
I think Cataclysm definitely doesn't deserve its negative reputation. I'd recommend for everyone to at least give the expansion a try if Blizzard go ahead and release it. Until Ashes of Creation of the right MMO is released, Classic Cataclysm is probably still going to be one of the best waiting room MMOs that you can play, since the content has already been fully developed and you can guarantee yourself that the content will consistently release on a good schedule. Blizzard have also expressed in interviews how they are enthusiastic to make changes to Classic Cataclysm to preserve the classic WoW aspect of the game. They really want to make changes to the game to preserve and please the classic player. And I think this is mostly true. They have shown this with all the changes that they've made to Wrath Classic, like adding Heroic Plus dungeons and class buffs. I definitely think with Cataclysm they will take this to the next level. I'm 99.9% sure they will not add Raid Finder in Classic Cataclysm, for example, especially as they have mentioned in interviews that they wouldn't want to. But they do want to make further changes. At the end of the day, they are interested in maintaining the most amount of subscribers to Classic WoW going forward. They've already sent out surveys to collect opinions on this topic from players, so you can bet that Classic Cataclysm will be a very different product to the original Cataclysm. It will be dramatically improved to keep people playing the game. I wouldn't be surprised if there were many out-of-the-box changes or additional features to get people excited, like time walking vanilla raids, for example, but that's a topic that can have its own video for another time. Before I jump off, guys, please do me a huge solid and subscribe to my second channel where I basically make videos like this, but not for MMOs. My name is MetaGoblin, and until my next video, ciao.